With multiple nations already vying for a foothold in North America, England enters the fray.
Here was this land, and everybody wanted to claim it. And one of the things you wanted to do was to defame other people who had claims. The English in particular, in order to morally justify their incursions into the Western Hemisphere, and of course they didn't really need a moral justification to do so, they ran the Spaniards down. And so out of this came what we call the Black Legend of Spanish conquest, as a way of saying the Spanish have forfeited their moral right to these lands, therefore we, the English, and of course the French in a similar fashion, and we have a right to go there. And point of fact, what you had were a group of imperialistic powers simply saying, we want to grab off as much as we can.
Queen Elizabeth's way of operating was essentially to put resources into the hands of people who could carry out national policies, so that Raleigh actually received a great deal of wealth, indirect and direct, as a result of royal largesse. I think to some extent with the understanding that this would be used to foster overseas enterprises like colonization.
Initially, Sir Walter Raleigh chooses Roanoke, low-lying land on the Virginia coast, as his base of operations.
Roanoke had one great asset, which is that it was within a set of treacherous sandbanks, which meant that enemy ships of the Spanish would be very reluctant to go anywhere near it, and so probably wouldn't find this pirate base. But if it's a hard place for enemy ships to get to, it's also a hard place for your own ships to get to, which meant that ships bringing reinforcements or supplies, their sea captains didn't like to go to Roanoke, and often just sailed away from it, which meant that the colonists there felt that they had been abandoned.
Roanoke was a terrible place to put a colony because it's not very productive land. It's basically sand, has very, very limited water supply, and you're really dependent on rainwater. And it was chosen for the wrong reasons. It was chosen in order to aid privateering.
The people who'd been established there initially were military men, and they didn't want to raise crops. They wanted Indians to feed them, just as Indians fed the Spanish conquistadors, which meant that this English presence developed a hostile relationship with the Indians, who didn't see any reason why they should be feeding these unwanted guests.
Well, the first people to go in every instance, both in the late 16th and in the early 17th century, were groups of young men, either soldiers or people who were of the right age and type to be soldiers. One of the things that's, I think, remarkable about Raleigh is that he realized that that wasn't the appropriate model and scrapped it, and in the second attempt to found a colony at Roanoke, he sent entire families. And that was a lesson that the Virginia Company then had to learn over again.
91 men, 17 women, and 9 children set sail for Roanoke in 1587 to establish the family-centered colony Raleigh envisioned. The commander of the expedition, John White, returns to England for supplies and more families. He plans to return to Roanoke in a few months' time, but it was actually 3 years before he could get back.
We let fall our grapnel near the shore and sounded with a trumpet a call, and afterwards many familiar English tunes of songs, and called to them, friendly, but we had no answer. At my departure from them in 1587, I will them that if they should happen to be distressed in any of those places, that they then should carve over the letters or name a cross in this form. But we found no such sign of distress. We passed toward the place where they were left in sundry houses, but we found the houses taken down, and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees, very fort-like. And one of the posts at the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off, and 5 foot from the ground in capital letters was graven C-R-O-A-T-O-A-N, without any cross of sign of distress. From thence we went along by the waterside, toward the point of the creek, to see if we could find any of their boats, but we could perceive no signs of them. Presently Captain Cook and I went to the place which was in the end of an old trench, where we found 5 chests that had been carefully hidden of the planters, and of the same chests, 3 were my own. And about the place many of my things, spoiled and broken. This could be no other but the deed of the savages, who had watched the departure of our men, and as soon as they were departed, digged up every place where they suspected anything to be buried. When we had seen in this place so much as we could, we returned to our boats and departed from the shore towards our ships with as much speed as we could.
There is not a trace of the families White had left on Roanoke Island.
And to this day, we're not certain what became of them. A return expedition that went to look for them found no signs of violence, so it doesn't seem that they were wiped out in an Indian attack, but it may be that they went a little to the north and lived among Indians in the Chesapeake Bay region. But what ultimately became of these people, we still do not know.
Did the Roanoke colony have a chance of succeeding?
And I think there was every prospect for Roanoke to have been a successful colony. The reason why it failed ultimately was because England got involved in a war with Spain. The fleet that Raleigh at least says he had gathered to go to Roanoke with fresh colonists and fresh supplies was diverted to the defense needs of the nation. And then following that, there was a prolonged war until the end of Queen Elizabeth's reign in 1603. Roanoke isn't so much, I think, a failure on the American side, it's a failure on the English side.